Hey, I'm Sid Menon, and you're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com.
She got a smile that makes your worst day feel like it's your birthday.
Hi everyone, John Liebman here. You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com. Coming to you today on location from Nashville, Tennessee, actually in the home of bass player Sid Menon. What's happening, Sid?
What's going on, man? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you working us into your schedule. I know you're busy. You're touring, going in and out of town with Chris Lane. I know you've been with him for a while, and you've got an interesting story, and I want to hear it, and I want the people to get a chance to hear it. You have some Indian heritage. You grew up in North Carolina. You're a bass player, but why have me tell the story? Let me hear it from you. You were exposed to music how, actually?
From a real young age, my parents are Indian classical singers, so I was kind of around that. But, we had, MTV on, and I'd be listening to Michael Jackson, dance around the living room when I was a little kid, And then my parents were also really big on music studies and music, and we kind of played a little soccer, too, my sister and I.
Well, I have to jump in here. I'm sorry. Indian classical music, is that, I don't know, is that Ravi Shankar, or is it?
Yeah. It's kind of like vocal, it's all, I guess you could compare it to sort of an operatic style, an American operatic style, but it's just these singers that literally dedicate their whole lives to, when I'm talking dedicate, I mean exercise and diet is 100% focused on vocal cords and practicing 8 hours a day.
Very disciplined.
Yeah. So it's like a very dedicated vocal style. It's almost a meditative sort of thing.
Did you acquire an interest for that at all?
Not really, but I think some of the the melodic tendencies and structures sort of got ingrained in me.
Well, is it like in quarter tones, or is it still pretty much semitones, or?
It's pretty much recognizable scales for American music.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot of variation. There's some weird stuff, but
it's still kind of Western, even though it's from India.
Sure. Yeah, it still has to be catchy, right? Any form of music has to be.
Yeah, but I don't know what's catchy in one part of the world might not be catchy in another part of the world.
That's true. I always felt like maybe it was probably American style, like Eastern and Western styles borrow certain things from each other, even though they're so different. It's the
as
same,
it should be.
Yeah, there's
I
the
think.
same object, but obviously a different angle viewing it. But
Fascinating.
Yeah.
How did you become a bass player?
Out of necessity, I
Nobody's ever given me that answer.
You know what? It's funny because just like any, I started playing keyboard when I was 4, and then I started taking classical guitar. I actually learned from Bill Kostler, who co-developed the Suzuki method for acoustic guitar for classical
Were
guitar.
you still 4, or were you older than
I
4?
was 7 at the time. I started learning.
7. Yeah.
That was all my parents. You can thank them for that. They said, you can play violin or you can play guitar. And I was like, well,
Duh.
I'm playing guitar.
Well,
Yeah,
but did they expose you to, I don't know, Segovia and Julian Bream or John Williams? John Williams, the guitar player, not the composer. Any of those folks?
Nope, none of that. I just, grew up listening to pop music on TV, and
But if you're studying classical guitar, you have to practice classical guitar stuff, right?
Yeah, definitely. But, at the time I was really too young to know anything other than the names of the songs or care. I was kind of just stuck up there, and they were like, all right, do this. But there's a Suzuki method, so it's a method for learning by ear, the ear training. So
Doesn't Suzuki involve your parents practicing with you? I thought I had heard that or read that somewhere.
they would come to the practices occasionally just so that I had to stay on track. But it was more a thing that I just did in the beginning because it was part of being a well-rounded human being. But then I sort of realized that I had like a weird aptitude for it. Like I actually would move faster than the other kids, and not in terms of the playing, but in terms of my ear recognition. I sort of had a knack for it. So I realized that real young, and then I started my first band when I was 11.
Okay, how did you, I'm sorry, we'll come back to that, but how did you morph or transform from classical guitar, and we haven't even gotten to the bass yet, but to pop stuff? I would imagine guys like, I don't know, Jimmy Page, Eddie Van Halen, or some of the others were on your radar?
farther on that. So,
Well, tell me about the transition from classical to rock and pop.
So Bill Kostler, my guitar teacher, his son, Adam, was one of the students that we were kind of at the same age. So we were in the same classes with him. And he was just a rock kid, you know. He grew up on, his dad's obviously a guitar teacher, so he was exposed to guitar stuff when he was young. So we started a band. It's actually funny. Him and I, we were like, all right, let's start a band. You know, we're kids. We're 11 years old. And we're like, okay, we got 2 guitar players, and Adam at the time was like, well, I'll just play bass. I don't care. And I was like, all right, cool. So they were like, we need a drummer. And I was in band in middle school, and I was playing saxophone. So in band class.
Did not know that about you.
Yeah, well, that's like a story for a whole other day right there.
Okay.
I just asked around the band class, and I was like, you guys know anyone that plays drums? This guy, Mike Schroeder, in the next band class played drums. I crossed him in the hallway leaving band class, and I said, hey, what's up, man? I'm Sid. He's like, oh, cool, I'm Mike. It's nice to meet you. And I was like, hey, you want to like start a band? I heard you play drums. He's like, yeah, cool. And like that was it. And I figured we would never play a note. We would just be kids in a band, you know? And then that weekend he called me. He's like, hey, you want to come over and jam? I was like, oh, so we're doing it? Yeah, cool, let's do it. And then we just got together, and we ended up playing like Green Day covers and Bush and, you know, what Soundgarden we could. Soundgarden's real angular, you know, but the Bush stuff and Offspring, more of that kind of that alt rock thing.
But you were still playing guitar at the time?
I was still playing guitar, but since I'd been playing classical my whole life, for the 4 years I'd been playing, I always played with my fingers. Like I'd played as if I were using a pick, but I was just strumming with my nail.
Did you grow your nails long? I know no, because
No,
they have to have certain kinds of cheese or milk or something. I remember.
I was supposed to grow this hand and keep this one short.
Right.
But, you know, being an 11-year-old kid still trying to be cool, you know, you're kind of like, I don't know how girls will feel about that.
Yes. I hear you.
So we started a band, and then we jammed, and then that band did well. We started playing, you know, at all the high school kids' parties or middle school kids' parties. And then just kind of grew into a thing where we started writing our music, went to a few different members.
Really? At middle school age, huh?
Yeah.
Good for you.
But then around high school, a buddy of mine, he actually he was a really good drummer. His name's Blake Richardson. He's actually a legitimately large, famous drummer now. He plays for this band Between the Buried and Me. So him and some friends.
Between the Buried and Me.
Between the Buried and Me. Yeah.
Just want to make sure they got that.
Yeah. Or BT BAM.
There you go.
That's the short one. They needed someone to play bass in the band, and we were good buddies, and they were like, I mean, there's kind of a deal on the table, so like it could be a cool thing. And I was 17. They were like 15 at the time when we cut the first record. So I started playing bass. I was like, I mean, I play guitar. How hard can it be to play bass? And, you know, I was in for quite a shock.
It's only 4 strings. How hard can it be?
Right. And but that shift for me was kind of what made me fall in love with bass, because I sort of quickly realized that, like, yeah, you can just play. It was kind of heavy, fast metal. So a lot of the time I did have to sort of just follow the guitar just for you to hear what's actually going on. I mean, that low end bass extension is what makes you hear when the guitars are flying around, what chords are actually moving under those notes. So the first experience with bass that I really had was just getting thrown into a metal band and just doing it because I was cool with the guys that were playing in it.
Did you have some bass influences, some bass heroes? Were there some bass players that got your attention?
You know, at the time, I had sort of started transitioning from listening to rock alternative stuff to more of like the metal and prog stuff. So, you know, I was really into Dream Theater.
John Mayung.
Yeah, he was, you know, just shredding the 6th string, and I would just look at him like that, you know. And then, you know, I really like Timmy C from Rage Against the Machine. You know, I really liked Rex Brown from Pantera.
I saw him yesterday. We were hanging out. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I've interviewed him a couple of times, actually.
That's cool. And then but you know, originally being a guitar player and being kind of a student of pop music, or just having that ear that sort of loves pop, a lot of my influences on bass were not necessarily bass players. You know, like Slash, for instance, is like a huge influence of all things music to me, because you know, he was a guy to me that could do a lot more than he did, but he just, you know, he would make a melody with a guitar solo that was as singable as the lyrics, as the hook in the song, you know? And that always stuck with me, because I was like, how can I apply that? Or I don't even know if I ever consciously thought about it, but I always tried to apply that mentality even to bass part. So when a guitar is flying around, at first I was like, all right, well, let me establish the foundation under that. But then I was like, well, maybe I can make a melody, because the guitars are so busy. It's almost like, you know, a complicated pattern happening. So
as long as you land on one when you're supposed to.
Yeah. As long as no one's looking back at you like you need to calm down back there, you know? Yeah. So I would experiment with different melodies and try to turn the bass into like a memorable sounding, like almost a hook that's happening.
Is Paul McCartney one of your influences?
I did listen to the Beatles growing up. My parents were into them, you know.
Because his bass lines are just so right.
Everything about that band is just, they just had it right. You know?
Well, yeah, but I mean specifically the bass lines. There's just that melodic thing. That's what the image was in my head when you were describing that.
Sure.
So yeah. What you holding in your lap there, Sid?
This actually I got today. And it's been under construction for probably about 6 months now from Sheldon.
Sheldon Dingwall.
Sheldon Dingwall, the man himself. I fell in love with his basses about a year and a half ago, and I started playing the Nolly model, the NG2. And I developed a relationship with Sheldon, you know, and I told him, you know, my pitch was, nobody in country has ever seen a fan fret, you know, nobody playing country music. It makes good sense, because there's a lot of stuff that needs that low B, but sometimes the traditional, you know, straight fret 5 can get a little murky on the B. Also, for being, you know, not being the front of house guy, you never know what your instrument's going to sound like.
Talk a little bit about the fan fret concept, layout.
Sure.
Because it's really fascinating, and for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a cool thing. What is your experience with it?
It's actually been pretty easy. I remember, you know, because the actual relationship from fret to fret is not that different. It's just, it seems like on the whole, it seems like a big, you know, how am I going to play this thing? But when you're actually looking down at it, it kind of nicely follows sort of the contours of the way your wrist wants to turn, which means your fingers aren't always, you know, straight. But the whole concept was, you know, the idea, I guess Sheldon explained to me, like a, you know, piano or a harp, you know, just to get a nice tension, you have to make the scale longer for the bass strings, which is, you know, the piano has that shape to it. Yeah. So the scale is actually longer. This one's a 4, my other one's a 5, but that B on the 5 is like a 37-inch scale, I believe. But by the time you get over to the G, it's like 34.5. So it feels good, the tension feels good, but there's so much more clarity you get out of that low B because of the scale, without having to sacrifice playing a 37-inch scale instrument, you know? And then you get it's more of an even tone. You know how usually as you move down the bass strings, it gets a little brighter and tinnier, and then it's a little warmer and muddier. It doesn't really have as much of that same thing going on with his basses.
Yeah, Sheldon was explaining that to me as well the other day at the Summer NAMM show, which is why we're in Nashville. What kind of strings are on here?
The Dingwall Strings, which he actually has D'Addario make them, but they're kind of custom for him. He has, you know, I asked him to give me the gauges one time, and he's like, man, I couldn't even tell you anymore. He's like, we just tension tested everything. Like, I think, you know, whereas it would be like a 40 and like a 55, or really? You know, like all the way to 105.
for a rock / metal guy, 40 would be kind of light, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think he based the set on 45s, but it's like instead of 105, it's like 107 or 108. You know, it's just whatever was perfect. And the second I played one of his basses with his strings on it, I was like, I don't care. That's it. Like, it feels great, you know.
You've been playing D'Addario a long time, right?
Mm-hmm. Actually, probably when I was a kid, you know, I first started on Ernie Ball Slinkies because I like the bright green packaging,
Yeah.
and But then when I started experimenting with different strings, I really found D'Addarios to be consistent, really consistent, and have good tone. And I don't know, it fell in my hands the right way.
Yeah.
And then now being a guy that exclusively plays their stuff, their strings, it's kind of cool because I felt a little weird when I played Sheldon's strings, the Dingwall strings, and I was like, man, I love these. And then I found out they're D'Addarios strings, so I was like, all right, we're fine.
Yeah,
we're keeping
cool.
it family.
Okay. What else is keeping you busy? I mentioned Chris Lane, and I know you're touring with him. Is that pretty much all you're doing, or have you got some other stuff going on?
I'm Chris's band leader and MD, so that keeps my job pretty full. I also make a lot of the tracks, the backing tracks that we use. We're real big on just coming out the gate with a huge sound, So we use a lot of those extra elements, but we create them ourselves. We get involved and we actually build the tracks ourselves, and so I do that for Chris, and then that requires a lot of time off the road, and we probably do 200 to 250 shows a year, so that little bit of time off the road, I'm usually spending 3 or 4 hours a day knocking something out for him. But then on top of that, I produce. That's been kind of a passion of mine for a really long time. Back when I was living in North Carolina, that was something I was doing for a lot of the smaller bands. I wanted local bands to be able to have an EP or a record that sounded pretty good. I mean, I hope I did a good job at it. I don't know that I did, but they seemed to be happy about it. So that was a passion of mine for a while. And out here in Nashville, I'm busy, but I still get a chance to work with some artists here and there and kind of keep those chops up.
How about the future? I know you're going to be busy for the foreseeable future, but is there something you've always wanted to do but just haven't gotten around to yet?
Go to the moon.
Okay.
I don't think that's going to happen, though.
Call up Tesla, or no, he's going to Mars, right? Or,
Mars is fine. I'll go to Mars.
I mean, Elon Musk is what I mean.
Yeah, there you go. We always joke about wanting to be the first band to play a show on the moon. Like, that can be a thing.
Is it a joke?
Well, hopefully not.
Yes.
There's some truth to every joke. They say that.
I just interviewed for one of our other sites called ForGuitarPlayersOnly.com. James Young from Styx, who actually happens to have a degree in aerospace engineering, and their new album is called The Mission. Nice. And there's a lot of influences from the kind of stuff you're talking about, and the planned trip to Mars in the year 20-something, 2030, 35, I don't know when it is, but you reminded me of that.
That's interesting because I studied mechanical engineering in college.
Okay.
That's all, that whole parents thing, trying to make sure I was well-rounded, because they always supported the music thing. They were so cool about it, but my dad is an engineer, my mom works in medicine, so they were always like, make sure you have your job and then this is your hobby. But then they very quickly realized this is my thing.
This is not a hobby. That's probably why another reason why you appreciate the fan fret system so much.
Yeah.
One last question for you, Sid. What would you be if you weren't a bass player? You can't say a guitar player. I mean, something outside of music.
I would probably be in medicine. My sister went into that field, and I've always kind of loved it. I did the engineering thing because I used to really like working on cars, and I was like, well, this could get me on a design team or something, doing something cool. But as I kind of got older, I really have a love for medicine and anatomy and even fitness stuff and diet stuff, physiology, human physiology. So I think that'd probably be somewhere that I would explore.
There's so much more to know now than there ever was, it seems, and all these new studies and things that are coming out. Fascinating. Well, it's great to keep playing the bass, though, regardless of what else you might do someday down the road. And this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting us into your home.
Yeah.
And getting to sit down for a few minutes.
Cool.
Much luck, continued success to you. Good luck with the tour, the producing, and everything else. And we'll look forward to seeing and hearing lots more of you in the future. I have a feeling you have a lot of notes left in you.
We got a lot of tour dates on the page too, so come out and see these bad boys in action.
Okay, when you see Chris Lane coming to your town, check him out because he's got a bad bass player. Bad in the good and the bad ass kind of way. I didn't want to say bad ass, but then I did.
Nashville, you can get away with it.
There you go. On location, Nashville, Tennessee, with Sid Menon. I'm John Liebman. You're watching for BassPlayersOnly.com.
I got your fix.